Were you surprised that there
Peter, what do
wasn't
you
more
think about
violent protest and reaction in the wake of the killing? Things seem to remain relatively peaceful, all things considered.
Um, they did remain relatively peaceful. There was a lot of chatter that the Memphis Police Department withheld the videos, said they were horrible, and then released them on Friday night, which perhaps is not the best time to release police brutality videos if you're worried about civic disorder. That said, from a nationwide policing perspective, it seems to have worked. Now, the key thing, though, I don't think is the timing of the release. It's that the officers were quickly um, held accountable in the sense that they were fired and criminally charged. I mean, the first time really we saw that was with George Floyd in the sense that it wasn't immediate, it wasn't as quick, but the traditional rallying cry, going back to, Al Sharpton in the 90s or 80s was, no justice, no peace. So here we do have justice in the sense that we have a justice system. I mean, it's not always satisfying justice, but the system is working at that level, and maybe that is. I mean, that's what we want. I think because I don't know after these happen, I don't know what else the alternative is. So that might have taken some of the sting out of it, or maybe the public has just reached a point where they can't handle another video and don't think about it, and just pre-existing opinions are confirmed or not. But I'd like to think it's because these officers are being held accountable, which is why people weren't out. Well, a few people were out there breaking stuff, but generally we didn't have the mass protests and
well, remember also that if that were 5 white guys, I think there would have been protests. I mean, the fact that it was brothers, as a lot of people put it,
Do you?
makes it different. That probably has something to do
I
with it
think
too.
so too.
Mm.
I mean, this was unique in the sense that everybody, there have been some white cops that have been fired and I think charged, maybe not yet. There have been others other than the 5. I think when the video was released, the sheriff department said, "Hey, we had some guys there too. Maybe they didn't know that," so they got fired after the video was released. Um, there's issues with the paramedic or the fire department
Yeah.
too, but the 5 cops who were pictured and were the main culprits in the killing, and the police chief, let's not forget, and the victim, everyone's black. Now, of course, and you've talked about this a lot in your show, people want to say it's still an example of white supremacy and all that, but at some point, you kind of go, no, this race was not the main factor here, or a factor even potentially. And I think John's right that helps influence public opinion.
That
You know what
people were not as angry.
we haven't
Excuse
heard.
me, John. I just want to clarify that the point is that people were not as angry as they might otherwise have been because the cops were black and not white in this context.
You know what I find interesting is one would think that the anti-policing crowd would jump on this point that I'm about to make, because in a way it serves the anti-policing agenda better. Um, and I've said this, and I know John has said this too, um, in relation to what I've written. But this is a police problem. It's not a race problem. It might be it's America. There's an underlying race problem always hovering over everything. But this issue is a police problem, and unless we address it as a police problem, we're not going to solve it. It's the exclusive focus on race that is part of the problem because we're not getting to the source of it, which is bad cops, a combination of bad cops, bad leadership, bad training, bad supervision. Where was the sergeant in all this? That's another question I want to know about this. Um, it is You're going to solve this departmentally by departmentally, um, through accountability and good leadership. It is almost always these sort of specialized units that get into trouble. And there was a Washington Post column yesterday saying we have to abolish all these specialized units. Well, every city has them, and it seems, I don't know, every 5 years, every 10 years, since 1990, or there've been a half dozen cases. But there are hundreds of these units out there, hundreds of day every year. the answer when something like this happens isn't to say we need to get rid of policing in whatever form. Um, but we do need to make sure these happen as little as possible. But every time this happens, and I'll say it again, it's going to happen again. We know that. It's a criminal activity. The idea that should never happen is ideal. It's unrealistic. It's like any crime. You got more than 600,000 cops out there. Most of them are young men of varying degrees of, maturity and intellectual development. Let's just put it politely. Um, it's irresponsible to be completely shocked that this happens in the abstract. It's going to happen. It's happened before. It'll happen again. The question is, how do we lessen it, and what do we do about it? But yeah, and it's not to excuse it, but it is inevitable at some point. But we can certainly make sure it happens less. And part of that, I think, is by charging these cops and not covering it up and things like that. But this specialized unit was clearly poorly run. There's no supervision there. And also, we don't know, but the way they did this, it doesn't look like the first time. We're going to hear more stories. That they seem pretty routine in their in the way they beat him.
in their brutality.
In their brutality, yeah. I mean, at one point, I've seen a lot of videos of people getting beat up. So the actual beating, I'll say, did not shock my conscience because I've seen too many of these damn things. But the one part that did make me go, oh shit, was at some point the cop, like one of them's holding him and the other one of the cops slugs him like 5 times. And that kind of, yeah, that to me took it to another level. They also, the fact that they were incompetent and couldn't get him to cuffs in the first place means maybe they were just incompetent later, but no, they could have cuffed him. They didn't want him cuffed because they wanted to keep beating him. That's my take on it. Because interestingly, once they did finally put him in cuffs, they did stop beating him then. So even they had some weird code that they were abiding by. But yeah,
Well, by then he was
the event did shock.
Semi-conscious and slumped over and sitting on the street curb with his back against the vehicle. I mean, it was just...
Yeah, and it still took a half hour from that point before the ambulance came.